It sounds impossible. But what happened inside the Soviet Gulags was far worse than the world ever imagined. Survivors spent their whole lives begging others to believe them, because the truth felt more like nightmare than history. In the late 1930s, hunger pushed men to fight over potato skins while guards stood by and watched. Foreign reporters were kept far away, no cameras, no witnesses, no voices from outside. Rumors whispered across borders, but no one knew what was real. What lay behind the barbed wire? What was hidden under the snow? The answers were locked inside thousands of miles of frozen silence. Only those who survived lived to tell us what happened, how the cold, the hunger, the work, and the cruelty were used like weapons. The story opens the door to a world built on suffering, a world designed not just to punish, but to erase human beings one breath at a time. And it begins with the first method, the one that broke bodies long before it broke spirits. The Gulag system did not kill quickly. It killed slowly, day after day, with labor that crushed bones and hope at the same time. This is where the nightmare begins. They worked men until their bones cracked in the frozen hell of Siberia. The Gulag wasn't created to reform people, it was built to drain every bit of strength they had left. Each morning meant another forced march through snow so deep it swallowed their legs. Prisoners were pushed into forest and mines with nothing but rusted tools and bare hands. The cold cut through skin like blades, dropping to temperatures below -40. Breath froze before it even left a man's lips. In the infamous Kolima camps, prisoners dug gold they would never hold. Every inmate had a daily quota: tons of earth to move, trees to cut, stones to carry. Missing a quota meant losing food, and losing food meant dying within days. Hunger killed quicker than any guard. They called it natural selection. Historians believe more than 3 million people died in these labor camps between 1930 and 1953. The Road of Bones earned its name because the frozen earth held more corpses than gravel. A survivor named Varlam Shalamov wrote that a man who lived through the winters had the strength of 10. He watched friends collapse mid-swing, still gripping their tools. No one paused. Guards only shouted, "Move," as if speed could keep death away. Nights were no refuge. The barracks stank of sweat, smoke, and sickness. Blankets were always damp. Lice crawled everywhere. Silence often meant someone had slipped away quietly. Every morning brought the same thought: who will fall next? The Gulag measured success in bodies, not work. And yet the suffering had only begun, because the next weapon was hunger itself. They starved prisoners so slowly that many forgot what real food tasted like. In the Gulag, hunger was not an accident, it was a tool of control. Every crumb of bread decided who survived another sunrise and who collapsed in the snow. Men doing the hardest labor received only 300 grams of bread, less than half a loaf. Anyone who failed to meet their work quota dropped to 100 grams a day. Barely enough to keep a child alive. Desperation pushed prisoners to chew leather straps, boil their belts, and scrape glue from old boots. Some searched garbage pits for frozen potato skins or gnawed old bones like starving animals. In camps such as Vorkuta and Norilsk, hunger destroyed friendships. A man could trade his coat for a bowl of watery soup with nothing but salt inside. Survivors later said the smell of food felt like torture. Guards sometimes sat near the starving men, eating loudly, letting crumbs fall to the ground just to watch them fight over it. One former inmate wrote that hunger wiped out every emotion: pride, shame, even fear. Only the instinct to stay alive remained. Winter made everything worse. Frost killed the tiny vegetables grown in camp gardens. When horses died, their frozen bodies became feast. In Kolima, prisoners dug through deep snow for half-buried carcasses to cook. Some even boiled flesh from unburied bodies, something many could never speak about again. Historians believe over half of all Gulag deaths came from starvation or diseases caused by hunger. The state recorded these deaths as weakness, but starvation was planned. The human body can battle hunger, but the cold breaks the mind faster. And that became the next stage of punishment. They forced prisoners to stand barefoot in the snow until their skin turned black. Cold became a weapon sharper than any knife. Guards didn't need chains or guns, they had the Siberian winter. Men were ordered to stand outside for hours, sometimes stripped down to almost nothing, in temperatures that fell below -50. Skin froze within minutes, toes split open, breath turned to ice on their lips. It looked simple from a distance, just standing still, but it was a slow death stretched through time. Some fainted and froze solid before anyone moved them. Others were made to stand barefoot on the snow until the flesh on their feet cracked like old wood. Guards laughed, saying the frost would teach obedience. Reports from Norilsk and Vorkuta told of men ordered to carry buckets of water on their shoulders, while the liquid hardened into ice before they could take a step. Many dropped dead where they stood, bodies stiff before they touched the ground. A survivor named Ivan Punin said the silence was worse than pain. You could hear the cold eating your skin, he remembered. Guards called it moral correction, forcing fear into the body until the mind shattered too. But the worst part came afterward. When men were dragged back into warm rooms, their frozen skin burst open from the sudden heat. Many never walked again. The Gulag could turn nature itself into a torturer. And when cold became familiar, the next cruelty came from human hands. They beat prisoners with rifle butts until blood melted into the snow beneath them. Violence ruled every corner of the Gulag. Guards weren't trained to manage people, they were trained to break them. A drop tool, a slow step, even an unlucky glance could bring a blow to the ribs. Some guards carried rubber clubs, others kicked with boots tipped in iron. Beatings became part of daily life, often for no reason except to remind prisoners they were powerless. Survivors said punishment existed only to feed fear. A guard named Konov became known for shattering noses with a single punch. In Vorkuta, overseers lined prisoners up after roll call and knocked them down one by one. Claiming they were too weak for socialism, many died instantly, trampled before anyone bothered to lift them. Work accidents were listed as discipline problems. If a man was crushed by logs, the report blamed him. His food ration was cut on paper, as if he could still eat. Some prisoners begged for a bullet instead of another beating. It was faster and far less humiliating. Women suffered even more. Guards dragged them by their hair, stripped them in the snow, and used shame as another form of control. In the women's barracks, bruises were as common as cold air. One survivor, Eugenia Ginsburg, wrote that the beatings had a scheduled morning, afternoon, and night. You learn not to cry, she said, because tears only made them strike harder. Violence became the language of the camp. Each blow reminded prisoners they were no longer people, but property. Yet when fists grew tired, guards turned to a different kind of torture, one that worked in silence and darkness. They locked prisoners inside coffin-sized dark cells until their minds began to break. These punishment rooms were called boxes, and they were used for anyone who spoke too loudly, walked too slowly, or dared to question an order. Each box was barely 2 meters long and 1 meter wide, too small to lie down, too cramped to breathe freely. There was no bed, no window, no toilet, only a frozen bucket and a hole in the floor. Prisoners stayed inside for days, sometimes weeks. Darkness swallowed them completely. They couldn't tell morning from night. Food came only once a day, a few spoons of watery soup and a crust of hard bread. The walls sweated from moisture, and rats crawled across bodies searching for warmth. Men who entered sane rarely left the same. Some began shouting at voices that existed only in their minds. Others forgot their own names or lost the ability to speak. A prisoner named Alexander Dolgin remembered counting his heartbeats to stay alive. When he lost count, he sang childhood songs until his throat bled. Some camps used wet cells, floors flooded with freezing water. Prisoners had to stand all night or drown in inches of ice. If they fainted, they froze where they fell. Silence broke people faster than fist. Many begged to return to work just to hear another human voice. But when sleep became their only escape, the next torture made sure even that small mercy disappeared. They kept prisoners awake for days until their minds began to collapse. In the Gulag, sleep itself became a weapon. Interrogators knew that a man who stayed awake long enough would say anything, believe anything, confess to anything. Some prisoners were forced to stay awake for 5, 6, even 10 days. Lamps burned through every night. Guards shouted without rest. Buckets of cold water were thrown on faces the moment eyelids began to fall. At Lubyanka prison in Moscow, one method was brutally simple: make the prisoner stand. If he sat, or slipped, or fainted, a belt struck him across the back. One survivor wrote that after 3 days without sleep, dreams began to appear in the room like real people. Shadows moved on the walls. Voices whispered confessions he never made. Doctors later said sleep deprivation could destroy the brain after only 4 days, causing hallucinations, organ damage, and complete mental collapse. Prisoners said they lost control of time. Minutes stretched into hours. Hours felt like seconds. Reality twisted until nothing made sense. Guards called this torture the conveyor. One interrogator questioned while the other rested, rotating so the prisoner never stopped speaking. Anyone who fainted was revived with ammonia or ice water, pushed back onto their feet, and forced to continue confessing. A man named Valentin Goncharov said he begged for 1 hour of sleep, more than he ever begged for food. I would have traded 10 loaves of bread for 1 hour of rest, he said. When exhaustion no longer worked, interrogators changed tactics again. Now they demanded not just words but confessions stained with pain. They tortured prisoners until they signed crimes they had never heard of. In the Gulag system, confessions didn't come from truth, they came from pain. Interrogations weren't meant to find facts. They were meant to force obedience. and KVD officers used fists, boots, clubs, and metal rods. They called it a conversation, but every blow carried a message: agree or suffer again. Many prisoners were questioned for 10 to 12 hours straight. Some were beaten with wet towels so bruises wouldn't show. Others were forced to kneel on crushed glass or iron bars until their legs swelled and tore open. One officer bragged that he could make a man confess to killing Lenin himself. After 3 nights of questioning, in Moscow's Butyrka prison, records showed prisoners admitting to crimes that happened before they were even born. It didn't matter. A signature made the system look innocent and the prisoner look guilty. Torture was not only physical. Officers threatened families' wives, children, parents promising to arrest them unless the prisoner cooperated. One man, Mikhail Kolyada, broke the moment he heard his child's name. He confessed without knowing what he was signing. Survivors said the worst moment came after the signature. They were forced to repeat their confessions in court, smiling as if it were true. Anyone who resisted was dragged back to the basement for clarification. By the end of the Great Terror, millions had signed false statements. The state didn't need proof, it needed broken souls. And those who still refused faced an even darker punishment, one hidden behind the walls of hospitals. They destroyed families so no one could ever escape the Gulag's shadow. The Soviets didn't stop with one prisoner, they went after everyone connected to them. When a man was dragged away, his wife and children entered a different kind of prison, one built from fear and silence. Families became tools in the state's torture system. During interrogations, officers whispered, "Your wife is next. Your son is already arrested." Sometimes it was a lie. Sometimes it wasn't. But the terror worked. Men broke faster from those words than from any weapon. Those who didn't confess were shown forged letters claiming their wives had betrayed them. Love was turned into poison. In Moscow's prisons, wives were locked in freezing rooms with dripping walls, forced to listen to recordings of their husbands screaming. Some women were stripped and drenched with buckets of cold water until their skins split open. Others were ordered to clean the rooms where their own families had been beaten. One woman later wrote, "They shattered us by making us imagine the sound of our own pain." Children weren't spared. Some were starved. Some were beaten for refusing to speak against their parents. Others were given new names so their family would vanish forever. By 1940, more than 300,000 families had been destroyed this way. The state turned every loved one into a weapon. And the most haunting part came long after the torture stopped. Survivors couldn't tell which screams were theirs anymore. History hides its darkest truths in the quietest corners. If stories like this make you think deeper, subscribe and stay close. The next chapter of forgotten history waits on the other side.